Everyone, thanks for joining our webinar today. I'm Catherine Holt, the Community Manager at FullCast, and we're here with Alex Newman, who's the Sales Engineer for FullCast. So I'll start with a quick bit of housekeeping. You can ask questions anytime throughout this webinar using both the Q&A box and also the chat box at the bottom of your screen. And we do want this to be interactive since this is a topic that hits close to home for most of us. So feel free to share questions or comments you have and any war stories you have in the chat as we go along. But we'll also have some time at the end to cover any remaining questions. Secondly, I'll be sending out a recording of this webinar. So if you need to hop off early or want to share with a team member, you'll have a link to the full webinar in your inbox tomorrow. So we're excited to have Alex with us today to talk about the daily motion of sales operations and how sales operations can be more strategic. Hey, Alex.
Hey, Catherine. Thanks for the introduction. So I'll click in here. Before we get started, just do a quick bio. Always appreciate seeing my experience and talking about it in third person, but to break up that a little bit, I will just talk more directly about some of the background I have in sales operations. So I started up doing kind of a hybrid role that was mostly sales operations at my first company, and then kind of ended up being kind of a revenue operations role. And when I started, the company was about 70 people, and we went up to about 200. So a lot changed over that course. But what I really recognized is that I enjoyed everything about sales operations. I think from creating and understanding a sales process to being able to get my hands on a lot of different areas of the business. And because I was new to the workforce in general, it was a really exciting role to understand a lot of different areas where you're still learning about what you enjoy. So that was a lot of fun. And I remember about a year and a half in, I went out for a coffee with one of the then executives at that company. And I was asking him pretty general advice. And I said, hey, what do you think about sales operations? What in general, like, what do I do next? And kind of asking him his thoughts around the role in general. And he said to me, if you want to put out fires and respond to other people's complaints, keep on the sales ops career ladder. Fortunately, I decided he was mostly kidding, and I continued to do sales operations at that company and then again in my next role. But it did make me think about people's perception of the role versus reality. And since most jokes have some basis of truth, we've come up with the following grouping, what we'll get into on the next slide, of how sales ops divides its and really spends its time. And I've compiled it based on conversations I've had in my capacity of a sales engineer here at FullCast with sales ops people at all different sizes of companies. Compiled it based on my own experience, and then of course kind of reading through all of the available material on sales ops. And it's a high level grouping, but want to use it to kind of illustrate more of how I think we're spending our time versus how we should. And just a small step back before I continue on, the purpose of this webinar and kind of the future webinars to come isn't exclusively to sell FullCast. It's really to ask ourselves, why don't we spend more time doing the most important and strategic projects in sales operations? So with that being said, here's what I've come up with. Had some fun building out these slides, and thank you, Catherine, for the creative freedom here she gave me to go forward and put some stuff on here. So when we look at this, I've broken it into 3 areas and perhaps embellished the fire drill a little bit more, only because it's a fun topic to get into. So when we look at this, firsthand, why is it like this? Why are we spending 2/3 of our time in areas that aren't the green portion? And I don't think it's because we're stupid. I think it's because sales ops enables companies to perform really the most critical and high priority tasks. How to sell, who to sell to, how to make that process repeatable. But the tools that we're equipped with, predominantly spreadsheets and Word docs and G sheets, and managing anywhere from 10 to 30 point solutions, forces us to be siloed in nature and end up doing a lot of systems work, always depending on your size of company, but you might, find yourselves managing more of your tech stack full time than you want to. So let's dig a little bit deeper into these three categories. So starting off with my favorite here, the fire drill portion. So these fire drills happen when perhaps an executive has an ask that can't be answered on their own, or something breaks, or a rep has an account that they want in their name and they feel like they need it in that very moment. And more often than not, these fire drills come up as reporting issues, and they happen because of a myriad of reasons, anything from poor data or just general lack of visibility. But oftentimes we're faced with a lot of these fire drills because we're seen as this very business critical role that is actually a bit of a generalist and has their hands on a lot of different parts of the business. And again, this all depends on your company size, but sales ops really has an advantage in being a generalist, in that at the start of a company, traditionally, when a VP of sales is hired, their first key hire is going to be that sales ops person. And since they're the people to make sales ops repeatable, they're so vital. And being this type of generalist and kind of general problem solver really is a blessing and a curse. And I think much more so a blessing than a curse. But I think it's because we're really important and depended on across a lot of different business units. And I always go back to, what I enjoyed so much about sales ops when I was at my first and then last company, which was it was such an important role to help the company understand how well they're doing and then what they should do next. And it gave everything I did, it made it feel very meaningful because it was such an important output that I had. And, whether it's, what new market to get into, or how should we be using our resources at our disposal, the best way possible, these are big high level questions that carry a lot of weight. So next section over is maintenance mode, this yellow piece. And the cartoon is meant to be more funny than anything, because we know that there are portions of it that we actually really enjoy, about building a sales process and sales policies and figuring out how to make people adhere to them. And it really is keeping the train on the tracks. And I actually appreciated a lot of this because I think it requires you to think about how your business is not only going to function in its current state, but how is it going to change down the road. And most importantly about the maintenance mode, kind of keeping the train on the tracks, is that it's all an effort to gather and format and have accessible this data, which actually lends itself back to those strategic projects. So then, of course, we have our green section. And while I'm going through this, I know that, again, like I said in the beginning, each company has different initiatives that are important to them. And so, and are important to you, depending on what industry you're in, what industry you're selling to, what exactly sales ops is defined at, as your company. Is it more of a sales strategy role, or is it kind of a combination of roles and you're wearing many hats? So as we're going through this, and we're even looking at this chart here, try and come up with on your own, what is the most strategic project you could be working on look like for you and your company? And this can be anything from evaluating a new technology to improve your sales efficiency, to determining, which industry to sell into. And what's defined as strategic for you might differ from another person in sales ops. But the way I'm defining them today is any project that requires a creative solution. And this is exactly what I love about sales operations. There are a ton of ways to solve the challenges in front of us. And it's your job to determine the best one for your company. And as I touched on earlier, to take it a level deeper, you have to think about satisfying the current needs of your business and how it will change and evolve over time. And needless to say, these projects can have a huge impact on the company if done correctly, and it can be extremely rewarding personally to solve them. So when we look at this, again, we see we're spending 2/3 of our time in kind of those lower value items, some that help with the focus on strategic tasks. Why are we doing this? And again, it's not because I think we are bad at our jobs. I think it's because it does feel like a necessary evil today. And it's necessary evil in order to perform those strategic projects. But here on this next slide, let's look at what it would look like in an ideal and more realistic world, at least in my mind. So before we were split into thirds, and now you can see that our green section is taking up 75% of how we should spend our time. And here's what we want to spend our time doing, and really the majority of it. This is the really exciting stuff. And again, it's going to change company to company, but not only is it an important goal to spend your time working on things that push the ball forward from a company perspective, but equally, if not more so, it's important from a personal happiness, productivity, and growth point of view. Think about, I've been in the workforce now about 5 years, and I talk a lot with my friends and former coworkers about, what keeps them going and what keeps them motivated. And ultimately, we spend so much time working. So if we're spending all this time, we're spending 5 days a week, tons of hours every week, every week in, week out, we want to be working on things that we're passionate about. And so again, this forces us back into asking, why don't we spend the most time doing what we enjoy and what will ultimately be the most helpful to our company? And to answer that, I thought back on some examples from doing sales ops, since it's easy to say I want to spend the majority of my time working on these strategic initiatives, but then putting that to practice, I definitely thought back on the days of actually doing the job and kind of being in the trenches, so to speak. So, just one example is, I always felt like I had these really important project ideas, or an executive would bring up a KPI that was really interesting and they wanted to see, and I knew it would be a great opportunity. If we did X project. However, in the middle, after getting started, doing my preparation and kind of getting ready to dive in, 2 reps come up to my desk and, they're arguing about an account, and what should be a 5-minute conversation turns into reps negotiating, and then I end up seeing, well, how did that account end up in her place, in her name in the first place? And you lead yourself down a rabbit hole. And I think that type of analysis always lends itself to discovering other problems. And before you know it, you've now spent, maybe what should have been 5 minutes, you're now spending 45 minutes trying to just figure out how that problem came to be in the first place. So really, we find ourselves back in kind of the non-strategic fire drill or maintenance mode when we're interrupted. And sometimes it's rightfully so, but sometimes it's unnecessary. And in fact, there are things that we can do to get ahead of it. So on the next slide, what I want to get into is what some of those strategic projects are, and focus on how we could spend more time doing them. And this really leads to why I joined FullCast in the first place, which is we are helping our customers, specifically those sales ops teams, spend time strategically and less time in maintenance mode. And we do this by automating the portions that can be automated in this maintenance mode. You can see that we've shrunk both our fire drill section and our maintenance mode down, and want to get into a few examples of what some of those areas are that we can automate to. So taking a small step back and looking at what some of these responsibilities for sales ops are, bucketed them into kind of the different types of sales ops or sales strategy that people face, again, depending on their company size. And we can see that for each of these groupings of tasks, without FullCast, the way that we're solving for them is in spreadsheets and in Word docs. And then, of course, managing a ton of point solutions. And this has led itself to what one of our prospects said back to us and described their existence as ops hell. And we can see that these 3 different points here extend across these 4 different kind of buckets of tasks that are often performed by people in sales ops. So the first is lack of collaboration, and that comes from being siloed in your spreadsheets. Comes from dealing with version control, making sure that every time you're reviewing something that it's in a digestible format. So for example, let's say you're going through a segmentation and territory carving exercise. Some early advice I was given was to review the model with as many different people as possible, and hopefully a few people in each different role, meaning I reviewed it with everyone from our COO to, of course, a VP of sales, down to an account executive level, just to get their quick input, one who I trusted and felt would give great input. And it was really difficult to go over the data quickly with people who don't live in spreadsheets all day. And it didn't lend itself to an easy conversation. And whatever changes or suggestions were to come about, it took a lot of time to actually implement them. The second would be bad data, and I know that this problem extends across every single task you perform. Whether you're going through, and let's stick with the territory and segmentation example, and you're trying to determine where an account should land, and you see that this company based in San Francisco City apparently has a state of New York. So then you need to spend time fixing that. Another example, you're looking at Microsoft, and for some reason you're in your SMB bucket, and you go, well, hold on, Microsoft definitely doesn't have 20 employees. This doesn't seem right. So we run into these data issues all the time, and that can absolutely slow us down and forces us kind of back into that maintenance mode. And then we have time to implement. So whenever we think about, let's say, implementing your new segmentation territory strategy, and you have the plan done in your spreadsheets, and it comes time to actually go live with it, depending on your size of company and depending who's responsible for what, either a couple of things will happen. So if you're, let's say, an SMB, you yourself might be making those changes. So you're going to be doing a ton of different exports and data loads to get the account, the new account segment and territories up to date, and account ownership, and consider holdouts and such. If you're a slightly larger company, you're going to have a CRM admin to do this. And if you're an enterprise company, you're going to have a CRM admin team and some element potentially of IT. And they can really serve as a bottleneck because they have their job to perform. And oftentimes it just takes a while to make these changes, since it is a huge change coming, and we need to always be really conscious of all the potential impact it could have. So I bring all that up, saying that with FullCast, the reason I joined is that we really are an end-to-end platform for sales operations that enables us to spend more time thinking strategically and less time buried in the weeds. And we can see the difference between this slide and the last is that we have our FullCast platform on the right-hand side, which enables us to perform a lot of the tasks on the left-hand side more efficiently. So first, we have a platform that helps us really get rid of this notion of ops hell. And it's collaborative in nature. It syncs with your CRM and what other data sources are relevant for you throughout the planning cycle. And I think we can all relate is, having to go through the burden of sharing various spreadsheets, making sure they're always the right one. And instead, what we've done is created a much more user-friendly way to build out your go-to-market plan, whether it's your segmentation and territory strategy, your team design, the way they're structured and kind of the way that different roles report into others. And then in doing so, you can have easier conversations with everyone from an account executive that you really trust and want to get their input on, all the way up to your COO who's actually pointing and saying, hey, I want this account to move from this territory to another. And within our platform, we've enabled a very seamless way to go about making these changes quickly. Then we have, secondly here, our policy-based approach, which aims to solve a lot of the data challenges that come up in a planning cycle and in general. So we have these policies, which are a combination of Apex code and validation rules and process builder, all to help ensure that we're always measuring and we're always understanding what to measure. And then if a piece of data doesn't look correct, flag it for review. And then lastly, this notion of click to commit. So no more haggling with your IT or admin team, or like I did back then, really learning it yourself. Instead, we have a platform for sales ops that enables you to create your go-to-market plan, be it your segmentation territories, your team design, or setting targets or setting quotas, and then actually commit those changes to your CRM directly without the intervention of IT or an admin. And being able to go through all of this planning to execution on your own really cuts down the time that it takes to implement, but it also enables you to turn it from perhaps an annual exercise to one that can be done quarterly. And so with FullCast, we spend more time being proactive than reactive, thanks to our data-first approach, collaborative platform, and avoiding those bottlenecks that inherently come up when you're dependent on other teams. So I hope today was useful. We wanted to keep it short, pretty brief, and really use it as a mechanism to think more about what your categories are for, how do you define a fire drill? What's maintenance mode, and what's a really important piece of maintenance mode versus one that's not so important? And then, of course, which projects do you wish you could spend more time on? Which are the ones that you're excited about? And ultimately, I think it's an extremely creative role and one that is really exciting to be a part of. And with every job, there are always ways that we can focus more on the stuff we love, and then hopefully rely on other softwares that come about to handle the stuff that isn't as fun to do. So I know we got a few questions in advance, so want to run through those, but like Catherine said, you can please feel free to submit some live, and we'll move into the Q&A portion. Catherine, how does that sound?
Yeah, that's awesome. So we had 2 questions from Christina that were awesome. So the first one is, what are some of the top sales operations books you'd recommend?
That is a very good question. So I think there's a lot of sales ops resources out there. Rather than a sales ops book, I'll give you actually, Sean Lane at Drift is doing this podcast, which I find really interesting and engaging and funny, and I highly recommend it. In terms of an actual book, I don't know if it's sales ops specific. I would apply this book to any reading list, be it personal or professional. I'm reading Principles by Ray Dalio. I think there are so many principles in the book that can help us do our jobs better, whether it's how to interact with our coworkers or how to just think more intelligently about the problems we're solving, and then take it a level deeper and ask why. I think the book does a really excellent job at breaking down a lot of these kind of complex concepts. So highly recommend that.
Cool. The second question is, how do you connect your sales operations efforts and headcount directly to revenue? how do you make the case for continued growth of the sales ops function? Which is a really tough question, but like honestly, it's so important to what all of our jobs are relying on. So any insight we have into that would be great to share, Alex.
Okay, that indeed is a very good question. So just to make sure I understand it, you're wondering how we connect our kind of sales operations spend, whether it's kind of the tools we're implementing or the headcount directly to revenue. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, perfect. So, all right. Well, thinking about this with kind of a sales ops lens, I think with anything, you use metrics to justify the cost of investing either in headcount or tools. And every dollar invested in sales ops needs to return an exponential value in revenue. So I think there are a couple different metrics that we could use to inform whether or not this is happening. So customer cost of customer acquisition, I think that's a really good metric to lean on, often one that's really tough to find. But once you're able to determine it well and efficiently over time, I think that revenue, that metric in particular, does go down as kind of an overall indicator of the sales machine becoming more efficient. So it's a really important one to grasp. But generally speaking, I think, a stat that stuck out to me that I learned a few months ago is that healthy companies are investing anywhere from, I believe it was 10 to 12% into 10 to 12% of revenue into sales ops. And the reality is that most companies are much closer to spending 3 to 5%. And that's why sales ops is such, they take on a lot of burden, and a lot of companies are struggling. And kind of goes back to today's overall topic, connects well actually, in that there's a lot of opportunity there to take, to automate a lot of the tasks so that we don't have to struggle through them and can focus on those really strategic initiatives. And I think, Catherine, the article I'm referencing, we can send it out after, and believe it's a McKinsey study. So yeah, we'll follow up with that. I think it's a really neat read.
Yeah, definitely. I can share that when I send out the email with the link to the
Perfect
recording. And also, I want to thank Marcus. He just wrote in the Q&A, that sales acceleration formula is a really good sales ops book. And I've actually had that on my shelf for a while. So I'm glad to see someone else recommended that.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Marcus.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, do we have any other questions? I know we've only got a few more minutes, so definitely want to make sure we get one or two more in if there are any. Otherwise, thanks so much for joining us. I think this has been a really fun kind of like informal, like industry talk. And if you guys have any other thoughts or want to talk more about, challenges that your companies are specifically facing, feel free to get in touch with Alex or myself. I'll include our contact information when I send out our follow-up email. So yeah, like the whole purpose of our company is to help make your lives easier and just ensure that everyone is really moving the ball forward and finding as much growth in their company as they can.
Yeah, absolutely. And one more point, I'll just share my screen briefly again. Are you able to see it, Catherine?
Yep.
So yeah, like Catherine said, definitely reach out if there's more your topics you're interested in. You can email me, alex@fullcast.io. But more than that, we're also looking to just have open discussions around sales ops. I know that, sales ops means a lot at different companies depending on your size, and it makes it a complicated topic to talk about since often they cover so much. So would love to hear from you, and even invite people on to kind of talk about what their sales ops experience has been like at their company, or definitely has evolved over time.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll end right on time, and I appreciate everyone joining us today.
All right. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.